Around the World in 80 Days by Jules Verne. Chapter 23, in which Passepartout's nose is lengthened enormously. The next day, Passepartout, tired out and hungry, said to himself that he must eat at any cost, and the sooner the better. He had the resource to sell his watch, otherwise he would rather die of hunger. And now was the time, or never, for this good fellow to utilize the strong, if not melodious voice in which nature had favored him. He knew a few French and English airs, and he determined to try them. The Japanese out certainly to be lovers of music, and since everything with them was done with the sound of cymbals, tom-toms, and drums, they could not but appreciate the talent of a European amateur. But perhaps he was a little early to organize a concert, and the dilettante, unexpectedly wakened, would perhaps not have paid the singer in money with Mikado's likeness. Passepartout decided then to wait a few hours, but in the sauntering along the thought came to him that he would look too well dressed for a wandering artist, and the idea struck him to change his clothes into an A-suit more in harmony with his position. This exchange would, besides, produce a sum which he could immediately apply to satisfying his appetite. This resolution taken, it was only remained satisfied to execute it, and in the long search that Passepartout found a native clothes dealer, to whom he told his want. The European garment pleased the man, and soon Passepartout came out wrapped in an own Japanese robe, and on his head a sort of one-sided turban discolored by the action of the weather, but in return a few small pieces of money jingled in his pocket. Good, he thought. I will fancy that we are in the carnival. Passepartout first care, thus Japanese, was to enter a tea-house of the modest appearance, and there, with some raisins of poultry and a few handfuls of rice, he breakfasted like a man for whom dinner would still be a problem to be solved. Now, he said to himself, after he had taken a refreshment, the question is not to lose my head. I have no longer the resource of selling this garment for another still more Japanese, that I must consider the means of getting away as promptly as I could from this country of the sun, from which I will preserve a sorry recollection. Passepartout then thought of visiting the steamers to set sail for America, and he counted on offering himself in the capacity of cook or servant, asking only his passage of the meals as his entire compensation. Once at San Francisco, he would see how he would get out of his scrape, and 100 things was to traverse these 4,700 miles of the Pacific stretching between Japan and the New World. Passepartout, not being a man to let an idea languish, turned towards the port of Yokohama. But as he approached the docks his plans, which appeared so simple to him at the moment when he had the idea, seemed more and more difficult of execution. Why would they need a cook or a servant aboard an American steamer? What confidence would he inspire? Muffled up this manner, what would give him the recommendation of any service? What reference would he give? As thus reflecting, his eyes fell upon an immense placard which sort of clown was carrying through the streets of Yokohama. This program was thus worded in English: Acrobat Japanese Troupe of the Honorable William Bachelor. Last presentations before their departure for the United States of America of the Long Noses, under the direct protection of God Tingo. Great attraction. United States of America. That's just what I want. He followed the man with his placard, and soon he re-entered the Japanese quarters. And a quarter of an hour later, he stopped before a large house and surrounded by clusters of streamers whose exterior walls represented, without perspective but in violent colors, the whole company of jugglers in an honorable bachelor establishment, who sort of American Burnham, director of troupe of mountebanks, jugglers, clowns, acrobats, equilibrists, gymnasts, which, according to the placard, was giving its last performance but for leaving the Empire of the Sun for the States of the Union. Passepartout entered under the porch of the house and asked for Mr. Battletar. He appeared in person. "What do you wish?" he said to Passepartout, taking him first for a native. "Do you need a servant?" asked Passepartout. A servant, cried Barnum, having stroked his thick grey beard heavily on the chin. I have two, obedient and faithful, who have never left me, and who have served me for nothing on one condition that I feed them. And here they are, he added, showing his two robust arms, furrowed with veins as strong as the strings of basketball. Can they be no good to you? None. Devil, would have been suited to me so well to leave with you. Ah, I see, said the Honorable Baklatar. You're just as much as the Japanese as I am a monkey. Why are you dressed in this way? One dress as one can. Very true. You're a Frenchman? Yes. A Parisian from Paris. Then you ought, then you ought to know how to make grimaces. Indeed, replied Passepartout, in fact, seeing his nationality called forth in this question. We Frenchmen know how to make grimaces, and it is true, but not better than the Americans. Just so. Well, if I do not take you as a servant, I can take you as a clown. You understand, my good fellow, that in France they exhibit foreign clowns, and abroad French clowns. Ah, you are strong, aren't you? Particularly when I've not been at the table. And you know how to sing? Yes, Passepartout, replied Passepartout, and formerly taken part in the street concerts. But you know how to sing on your head, and top spinning on the sole of your left foot, and the saber balance on the sole of your right foot. Parbleu, replied Passepartout, who replied the exercise of use. And then, you see, all is right, replied the Honorable Bacatar. The engagement was there included, and then Passepartout had found his position. He was engaged to do everything in the celebrated Japanese troupe. It was not very flattering, but in a week he would be on his way to San Francisco. The performance, so noisily announced by the Honorable Baccalaureate, was to commence at 3 o'clock, and soon the formidable instruments of the Japanese orchestra and the drums and tam-tams sounded at the door. We understood very well that Passepartout could not have studied a part, but he was given the support of his solid shoulders and the grand feat of a human pyramid executed by the long noses of the god Tengu. This great attraction of the performance was to close the series. Before 3 o'clock, the spectators had crowded a large building, and the Europeans, natives, Chinese, Japanese, men, women, and children rushed upon the narrow benches into the box opposite the stage, and the musicians had entered, in the full orchestra with gongs, tam-tams, bones, flutes, tambourines, and large drums went to work furiously. The performance was what all these acrobatic exhibitions are, and it must be confessed that the Japanese are the best equilibrists in the world. One, with a fan and small bits of paper, executed with the graceful trick of butterflies and flowers. Another, with the odorous smoke in his pipe, traced rapidly through the air as a series of bluish words formed a compliment addressed to the audience. And the latter juggled with lit candles, in which he blew out in succession as they passed before his lips, which he lit again, one after another, without interrupting for a single moment his wonderful jugglery, and the former produced, by the means of the spinning top, the most improbable combinations. Under his hands these humming machines seemed to be gifted under the life of their own in their interminable whirling, and they had ran over pipe stems and over the edges of sabres over the whiles as thin as hair, stretched from one side of the stage to another, and they went round the large glass vase, and went all up and down bamboo ladders, and scattered in all corners. And produces the harmony effects of the strange character by combining their various tones. The jugglers tossed them up, and they turned in the air, and threw them like shuttlecocks with wooden battledores, and they kept on turning, thrusting them into their pockets, and when they brought them out they were still spinning, until the moment when a rack spring made them butt into a Chinese tree. It is useless to describe here how wonderful feats of the acrobats and gymnasts of the troupe, in turning on ladders, poles, ball barrels, etc., were executed with remarkable precision. But the principal attraction of the performance was the exhibition of the long noses, astonishing equilibrists whom Europe was not yet acquainted. These long noses form a special company placed under the direct patronage of the god Tengu. Dressed like heroes of the Middle Ages, they bore splendid pairs of wings, and on their shoulders. What distinguished them from the more particularly of the long noses which their faces were then ornamented, as a long nose in which, and above all, the use they made them. These noses were nothing less than bamboo, 5 or 6, 10 feet long, were some straight, some others curved, the latter smooth, and the former with warts on them. It was on these appendages, fastened firmly, that their balancing feats were performed. A dozen of these secretaries of the god Tengu laid upon their back, and the comrades came, dressed like lightning, lightning rods, to make sport on their noses, jumping, leaning on one another, executing the most incredible somersaults. To close, they had specifically announced to the public the human pyramid, in which 50 long noses were to represent in the car of the Juggernaut. But instead of forming this pyramid by taking their shoulders from a point of support, the artists of the Honorable Baccalaureate made it with their noses, and that one of them usually formed the base of the car had now left the troop, and it was always necessary to be strong and agile. Passepartout was chosen to take his place, and Goodfellow felt quite melancholy when sad recollection of his youth had put on his costume of the Middle Ages, adorned with party-colored wings, and when the nose was 6 feet long had been put onto his face, but this nose was to earn his bread for him, and he took his part. Passepartout went upon the stage and took his of those colleagues in which were to form the base of the car of the Juggernaut, and all stretched themselves on the floor, and their noses turned towards the ceiling. A second section of the equilibrists placed themselves upon these long appendages, and a third formed story above, then a fourth, and on these noses, which only touched at the point of the human monument, stood to rose at the height of the cornices of the theatre. Now applause was redoubled, and the instruments in the orchestra crashed so much like thunder, that when the pyramid shook, the equilibrium was broken, and one of the noses of the base was missing, and the monument fell down like a house of cards. It was Passepartout's fault, who, leaving his post, clearing the footlights, without the aid of his wings, climbed up to the right-hand gallery, and fell at the feet of a spectator, crying, "Ah, my master, master! You here? Myself! Well then, in that case, to the steamer, young man!" Mr. Fogg, Miss Auda, who accompanied him, and Passepartout rushed to their lobbies of the building. They found the Honorable Baccalaureate furious, claiming damages for the breakage. Phileas Fogg appeased his anger by throwing a handful of banknotes. Phileas Fogg and Miss Auda set foot on the American steamer, followed by Passepartout with his wings on his back, and his face the nose of 6 feet long, which he had not yet been able to tear off.